Secrets of Hollow Creek. The start of the school year brought with it the usual mix of excitement and dread for the students of Hollow Creek Middle School. As the final days of summer slipped away, a suffocating sense of unease settled over the town, like the stifling heat that clung to the early September air. Lena, Mark, and Jackson were inseparable, a trio forged in the fires of countless childhood adventures. They had spent the summer exploring the dense woods that surrounded their small town, unearthing secrets and imagining themselves as explorers of old. But now, as the sun dipped earlier each evening, those carefree days were behind them, and an unfamiliar tension took hold. It began with a whisper. "Have you heard about the new teacher?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a murmur as the three of them sat in their usual spot beneath the sprawling oak tree in the schoolyard. Mark shrugged, his usual bravado tempered by the eerie quiet that had fallen over the school. "What about her?" "They say she's, strange," Lena continued, her wide eyes reflecting the fading light. "She doesn't look like she belongs here, and some kids say they've seen her doing weird things after school." Jackson, ever the skeptic, rolled his eyes. "You're just trying to freak us out, Lena. It's probably just some lame rumor." But even Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The new teacher, Miss Harlow, had arrived in town with little fanfare, slipping into her role as the 6th grade homeroom teacher without so much as an introduction. She was a tall, gaunt woman with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and she moved with an unnatural grace that unsettled anyone who watched her for too long. The first day of school was always chaotic, but this year felt different. There was an undercurrent of fear, a tension that hummed just beneath the surface. Lena noticed it first, the way Miss Harlow's gaze lingered on certain students, how her lips curled into a barely perceptible smile when their backs were turned. By the end of the first week, rumors had spread like wildfire. Some kids claimed they saw Miss Harlow speaking to herself in the empty classrooms after school. Others swore they heard her chanting in a language they couldn't understand, the words echoing through the dim hallways long after the final bell had rung. It wasn't until the second week that things started to go missing. At first, it was little things, pencils, notebooks, a stray shoe left behind in the rush to the bus. But then, the students began to disappear. The first was Sarah Mills. She had stayed late after school to finish a project and never made it home. Her parents, frantic with worry, called the school, but no one had seen her. The police were called, and a search party was organized, combing through the woods and fields that surrounded the town. But there was no trace of Sarah. The next day, 2 more students vanished, Tommy Jenkins and Beth Carter, both last seen heading toward Miss Harlow's classroom after the final bell. Fear gripped the town. Parents refused to let their children walk to school alone, and the schoolyard, once filled with the sound of laughter and games, became a place of hushed whispers and sidelong glances. Lena, Mark, and Jackson knew they had to do something. They couldn't just sit by while their friends disappeared. After school, they met in the woods, where the trees offered some semblance of safety from the creeping dread that had taken hold of Hollow Creek. "We have to find out what she's doing," Lena said, her voice trembling. "We have to stop her." Mark nodded, his jaw set in determination. "We'll stay after school tomorrow, hide in the classroom and see what she's up to." Jackson hesitated. "What if she catches us?" Lena placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes hard. "We can't let her take anyone else. We have to try." The next day, the 3 friends stayed late after school, slipping into Miss Harlow's classroom when no one was looking. They hid behind a row of tall bookshelves, barely daring to breathe as they waited. The minutes ticked by slowly, the silence pressing in on them. Just when they thought they had made a mistake, the door creaked open, and Miss Harlow stepped inside. She moved to the center of the room, her movements slow and deliberate. She began to speak in that strange language the kids had mentioned, her voice low and melodic, rising and falling like the wind through the trees. As she spoke, the air in the room grew heavy, charged with a dark energy that made Lena's skin crawl. The shadows in the room deepened, twisting and writhing like living things. And then, to their horror, they saw them. Sarah, Tommy, and Beth, emerging from the darkness. Their eyes were vacant, their faces expressionless as they moved toward Miss Harlow. She was taking them, body and soul, into the void where she came from. Mark's hand closed around Lena's wrist, pulling her back from the edge of the shelf. They had to get out, had to escape before it was too late. But Miss Harlow's voice grew louder, and the darkness reached for them, tendrils of shadow snaking across the floor. They had seconds to act. Jackson, the fastest of the three, grabbed a metal ruler from a nearby desk and hurled it at the light switch. The room plunged into darkness, breaking the spell for just a moment. The kids ran, bursting out of the classroom and into the hallway, their footsteps echoing off the cold, empty walls. Behind them, Miss Harlow's voice called out, twisted with rage and something else, something ancient and evil. They didn't stop running until they were out of the school, the cold night air filling their lungs. When they looked back, the building was silent, the windows dark. Miss Harlow was gone, but the memory of that night would never leave them. The next day, the news spread. Miss Harlow had vanished, leaving behind only an empty classroom and the lingering scent of decay. The missing children were never found, but the disappearances stopped, and life in Hollow Creek slowly returned to normal. But Lena, Mark, and Jackson knew the truth. They knew that the shadows in Hollow Creek would never truly be gone, that some nights, if you listened closely, you could still hear Miss Harlow's voice, calling out from the darkness, waiting for the day when she could return.